I think the Netflix development process just break things personally. They just
Clearly.
Yeah, they're too interested in shamelessly catering to certain demographics because they're desperate to get their subscriber counts back up and not have people drop their subscriptions. And they see in their data who's hanging on to Netflix and who's dropping it.
Yeah.
It's clearly they're trying to attract women of a certain economic bracket and they don't know how. And that's wrecking some pretty and they also want things with built-in audiences.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, they've recognized their fantasy superhero stuff does well for them. And so they're like, okay, we'll get this, but can you make it about a woman? Or can you beef up the female representation in it? Because we got to keep our female subs up. And it's just a mess. It's such a mess.
And it's so frustrating because if a story is popular and already has a built-in fan base, it has that for a reason.
Right.
And it's similar with the Rings of Power. I haven't watched it because I don't have Prime. I have a friend who has been watching it, and he said, look at it like Cruella. It's fan fiction with a really high budget.
I actually enjoyed Cruella for what it was, though.
Same.
I saw Cruella by accident. It was a double feature at a drive-in. I think
you were going to the drive-in at that point.
It was the double feature on Black Widow. That's right. And
Cruella
I ended up enjoying Cruella. Oh, way better. I ended up enjoying Cruella more. Like way more.
See, when I looked at it as fan fiction, I'm like, you know what? This is actually kind of fun.
Yeah, it was.
It's Devil Wears Prada meets Harley Quinn.
That's absolutely right.
And for what it was fun.
Yeah.
It does not fit continuity at
all. No, not at all.
They accidentally made Pongo and Perdita incestuous.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, they are Dalmatians.
True.
Apologies to Dalmatian furries.
But with Rings of Power, I admit I respect Tolkien more than I actually like him.
You know what? That's a really apt statement.
And, I say this as a writer, and I am in awe of what he did. Now, there is the part where I'm like, look, similar to The Witcher, which was written to be Polish, Tolkien was writing a mythology for Britain. Because
he borrowed heavily from the pre-existing mythology of the British Isles.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do think something gets lost when you try to say, oh, well, it's not diverse enough. Okay, but there is a reason for that. And I'm treading carefully.
Well, it's funny because all I can speak to is my original growing up in a very multicultural neighborhood, reading Tolkien. To me, in my head, the elves and the dwarves and the hobbits and the races of men were metaphors for diversity, for people who are different from you. Now, Tolkien compared it to, Tolkien's got this contradictory thing where he claimed he hated allegory and the Lord of the Rings was not allegory, but also the dwarves were totally the Jews, right? So, I mean, the Jews were the other in England at the time. So that is there. I just think when they do this stuff, and Star Wars has the same problem in a lot of ways. They don't do it thoughtfully. They don't do it systemically. I watched Andor and said, instead of, they have this whole race of people who speak a different language, and they're clearly some sort of indigenous people. They had a golden opportunity to make everyone black or brown. Instead, they still just smattered black people around the world like topiaries at the Magic Kingdom.
And, I remember hearing there was someone on YouTube did a review of the first season of The Witcher. And I don't remember who it was, but one thing they said was the population everywhere looks exactly the same. So I can't tell what kingdom we're in.
Right.
Because
Right.
it's all just this diverse mix.
Right.
Where, yes, that is what we see now, but that is a very recent development. It If you had someone who looked very different in a particular kingdom back then, there was usually a reason for it.
That's right.
And so I think it is, especially if you've got a situation where there's all these kingdoms, where it's like you can make, okay, this one is white, this one is worth it, and that is diversity in a realistic way in a world where you don't have fast travel and where it's not easy to co-mix.
That's right.
The way it is now.
That's right.
And it's like if you want to write a fantasy kingdom where, okay, here's this one, it's English coded, here's this, which is Spanish coded, and this and that, and all these other places that bring in more diversity, you can absolutely do that. I come from a very old school old school method of world building, where it's like cultures develop the way they do for a reason. And it's like the whole reason we have skin tone in our world is because who was closer to the sun and had to develop more melanin.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing about Rings of Power is they're clearly basing Numenor on Morocco.
Yeah.
And Numenor, this is not a spoiler because it's known canon, people. Numenor sinks. It's the Atlantis of the of Middle Earth. And the idea that they put I think she's mixed race, but we'll just go in a black woman, or at least a mixed race woman, as a ruler who is literally set up to fail by the story. Why not make the whole, it's still full of white guys, Numenor, and that makes no sense because it sinks. It's not there in the Third Age. You could have done anything you wanted with this, and they use the architecture of Morocco and not the people. And I find myself in this weird it's the same issue I have with, the killing characters thing. I find myself in this weird place with Rings of Power. In Princess Disa is one of the best characters in the whole thing. That's the Black Dwarf. And I actually got asked last night whether I have a problem that dwarf women don't have beards. That does bother me, but I understand why they did it, because they wanted to sidestep the whole transgender argument. I completely understand why they had to pick how they were going to fail there.
Yeah.
But it's, for me, I find myself actually not going, oh, I have a problem with a black elf. I don't think the show's diverse enough. You don't get points for tokenism in Tolkien. Yeah. Tolkienism, you don't get points for just smattering random black people around. They could have made every human in that a person of color. And we go, okay, in the time between this age and the time for when, the characters in the Lord of the Rings were born, humans maybe interbred with elves, maybe there was some environmental change, something, they lightened up.
Yeah.
They could have done way more with that, and they're just, okay, well, this guy's the Aragorn figure, so we're gonna make him look like Aragorn. Okay, these are elves. Elves look a certain way, except for the one fucking guy that we put on a chain gang. That killed me. And I think this is sort of the same thing that we get into with the fridging trope, right? Not, for me, it's not that they do it. It's that they do it dumb.
Yeah.
And they don't, like you said, they don't figure out. Too many people do things by default.
And here's, one thing I talked about when we were discussing this, preparing yesterday, is comic books are soap operas.
And I'm curious about where you're going with this.
Okay. So I actually first started to realize it because back in Civil War, when Black Panther married Storm, they brought in a soap opera costume designer to design her wedding dress.
Okay.
And there was an interview with him in the back of the omnibus, I think, where I don't even remember what he said, but he's like, yeah, they're very similar mediums because it's these long running stories with these characters and this endless drama. That's my addition. And it
Mhm.
made me realize there's not that much difference. You need the difference is that because you aren't dealing with actors, you can use the same characters for 100 years, which I have issues within that. I'm kind of done with
See,
that now.
see also the symptoms, the Simpsons, the symptoms.
Yes.
That was a Freudian slip. See, it's interesting because I always get into this battle in my own head about whether, because observationally, you're absolutely right about the drama. And
Mm-hmm.
this is an issue I have with superhero comics just because of my own experiences. People who know my story know I came up pretty rough,
Yeah.
right? And that's part of the issue. I do not have time for this horse shit. And I wonder if the drama, the false drama or the forced drama is innate to the medium, whether it is an essential quality or whether it is just in the application. Because there's been some utterly genius comics over the years. The Hulk
Mm-hmm.
run that resulted in Professor Hulk. It was silly, but when I go back and read, it's like this is an expansion of the medium with the association of this is a superhero who has a legit serious mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Iron Man and his alcoholism, uh, which yes was dealt with. You could say it was kind of campy, but for the time, that was pretty hard hitting. And then you get into stuff like some of the Elseworld stuff that DC did during that era, Watchmen, as much as it sort of ruined comics. There are people who have, I mean, I think I can never pronounce his last name. Stepan, how do you say his last name?
Stepan Sejic,
Sejic.
I
Okay.
believe.
I think he did some really, really interesting noir stuff with his Harley Quinn art. And
I'm so most people who don't follow him don't know. It was supposed to be a whole series with like
yeah,
three
you can
books of
tell.
Harleen, 3 books of Ivy, 3 books of Selena, and then eventually Gotham Sirens.
Right.
And he recently did a short for the Harley Quinn uh 30th anniversary
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah.
And but he's a there was a point a month or two ago where we thought he was hinting he might come back and at least do the first volume of Isley,
Mm-hmm.
which I wanted that so badly. But a couple days ago he officially said, no, I'm done with superhero stuff. He's tired of the industry and the infighting and everything. So he's like, nope,
Yeah.
I'm done. I'll focus on my stuff. Which I'm like, yes, I love all his original stuff, but I still would have loved to have seen Isley.
And
The concept art he's done for it
and
is absolutely
that's the
spectacular.
thing. The creators get blamed, but really creators can't greenlight their own books.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons I think comics are still so stunted is because the editors who greenlight these things aren't being held accountable. People dogpile the showrunner on a series. They say all these nasty things about a particular creator, but the editors just skate. And the editors are the ones that are saying, and the the executives at Netflix whose names nobody knows that are actually greenlighting these projects, they're the ones
Yeah.
actually gatekeeping what gets through.
Yeah.
And I, anybody who's in a pitch that they take on their own energy, they become their own monsters, right? Like you're in there and you come in with your particular concept and then it becomes this improv game of yes and, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like you come in with your concept that, but what about if this female character was a male? Okay, yeah, because you want the gig so bad, right? And then this happens and you start bullshitting. You just start pulling plot devices off your ass, out of your ass, because you want the yes so bad. And then you walk out of the meeting and go, what the fuck did I just agree to?
Yeah.
And I do
And
think He-Man, where pretty much every how many characters in that show, the Kevin Smith version of He-Man, got fridged to say something about He-Man? Like that was
Yeah.
He-Man and the Fridging of the Universe. Prince Adam got fridged to say something about He-Man. That is the weirdest fridging ever.
Okay, I hate grimdark fantasy.
Yeah.
And even stories that aren't quite grimdark. Everyone wants to be Game of Thrones.
Including Game of Thrones.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, we're going to kill these characters off because we're serious and we're dark. In Lego Batman, there is a point where Batman is like, here's a song I wrote for my girlfriend. It's all about how I'm an orphan. And it's all black, dark closet. This is real music. It's dark. It has meaning. And I'm like, that is all I hear whenever I see these shows and stories. Like, we're edgy. No, you're not. You're 15. Go sit down.
Right. That's right. You're absolutely right. Like, and that's I mean, look at Batman's origin as a fridge. It's it's a double fridge.
Yeah. Now, I will say, I think, people, we get the concept of, oh, well, fridging is sexist. I don't think it is, because like I said, you have this idea of you need to do something that will make the reader and the character feel. It's not even just about the character. It's you need the reader to care and see why this is a big deal. So it's really easy you can either kill the woman, kill a parent,
right,
kill a child, or kill the dog. Well, people don't like anything that kills the dog, hence why we have an entire website for Does the Dog Die?
And yet Last of Us 2 did all of that.
Yeah. And I say it a little mockingly. I think Does the Dog Die is a great site. They're doing very good work.
I gotta correct myself though. I said I agreed that it wasn't sexist, and this is where I'm gonna get called a pick-me girl because oh my god, I'm making a nuanced thought. I do think it is kind of sexist in that it continues the emotional stunting of action-driven male characters. I do think that there's because the guys who write these stories, and it is mostly men, that just is a statement, that is a fact. Because so many of them are so insecure and so stunted themselves, they can't go the gentler places without something obvious. Have you ever seen the movie, was it Sleepless in Seattle? It was one of those Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks movies. There's a scene about movies that make them cry. And
I think I saw the movie like 20 years ago.
Right. Well, the women all start I'll start going on about
yes, I remember.
And then the men all start tearing up about, I think it was The Magnificent Seven.
Yes.
Yeah, where the guy is in the parachute and he's dead and he's still floating and they're all crying. I love that movie. And
I actually was recently thinking about a similar experience I had. I was staying with a friend and her husband a few years ago, and she and I started talking about I think it's from early 90s version of The Little Princess.
Oh.
And that is one of the most traumatizing movies I've ever seen.
A lot of things from the 80s are quite traumatizing in retrospect. Yeah.
So, oh God, I have to keep this very simple. But so she was talking about this specific point in the movie. And like, there's all this context around it of like why this little thing she does matters. And it related to the Indian fairy tale of Rama and Sita and all this. And she and I both almost started crying just talking about it because it's one of the most emotional scenes I've ever seen. And 20, almost 30 years later, my heart rings just thinking about it. And her husband had never seen the movie. And he's sitting there going, and he's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's watching us like, I have no idea what to do. And she tries to explain it, but like it just doesn't hit the same because he hasn't seen it.
You have to be there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from that point of the writers are doing very basic things and they're not, I see what you mean about the sexism there. Sexist against women, I don't think so, specifically because, again, like I said, it's you need something to make the reader care right away. So it's
Yeah.
easy to say his lover, his this, his that. And we see this, and that's part of why I compare comic books to soap operas, is because it's, you have to, something has to happen.
Right.
And at this point, we've seen it all. So you have to go something high stakes, even as we're all rolling our eyes. Oh, this character died. It doesn't matter. They're going to be back in a few years.
But that
This
is
have
that is why I find it so interesting that you are right. Observationally, you are right that comic books are soap operas for men. And
mm-hmm.
yet, there are existential threats in comic books. What do you mean you need something to happen? Plenty of things are happening, right? They're
But
just
you need an emotion. You need something emotional to happen to
and
make the reader care.
that's the thing. The writers are so stunted that they're not actually emotionally connecting to the A plot. They
Yeah.
have to throw this side shit at it that and I mean, I also think that that's tied into, I know one of your big pet peeve song, the overuse of bathos in modern movies. I think the two things are connected, that people are so stunted, they are so shut off from their emotions that they can't do Captain America feeling incredibly guilty about what happened to Bucky. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they can't even do a villain redemption arc without epic amounts of torture.
Yeah.
So they have to keep at these really obvious, well, no one's going to judge someone for feeling bad about this, instead of let people judge. Like, let people judge someone for their reactions to things. And that's what I think is so magnificent about She-Hulk, is that they knew the audience was going to go fucking bananas. They may have overdone it in places because, again, that not being able to read how the audience was going to perceive it. Because
Yeah.
there's a real difference in the audience I'm seeing now between people who know Marvel Comics and what they're doing and people who don't. But the fact that they managed to make something like, I mean, stuff with female characters doesn't tend to hit me in the feels. That episode where her love life was literally on trial and a whole bunch of guys were taking the stand and saying under oath they never
Okay,
would have
I
given her a
haven't
second
seen
look as
it.
Jen. Yeah, they actually do this. They actually do this scene where they're basically going, yeah, I never would have given you a second look if you weren't She-Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, as somebody who's done pinup modeling and has had that, I hate that. As somebody who has, I have done pinup modeling. I don't speak for other pinup models. I just speak for myself. But because I do other things, and that's not my all the time gig, and I was building sets and doing technical directing at the same time as I was doing pinup modeling, sometimes I'd show up in sweats and with my hair just pulled up and not a lot of makeup. And you'd see the disappointment on faces. And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, I cannot deal with this right now. But it gut wrenched me.
Yeah.
There was a moment in The Woman King, which I know you haven't seen either, but she talks about how, with all the battle, with all the pain, with all the war and everything like that, she lost who she was. And I was like, oh my God, feels. Oh my God, feels. Oh my God, feels. It really got to me in the way that some of the other tropey cliche elements of the movie didn't. And I was thinking, there is no reason you couldn't do a scene like that with a male superhero. It is essentially the same story of losing yourself in the constant war. And Viola Davis is amazing in that moment because she doesn't oversell it. But
And I think that's a moment a lot of superheroes need at this
yeah,
point.
and they don't if I were an editor, it'd be like, okay, all these cliches, all these tropes, guys, you don't get to use them anymore. I want a new story about saving the world. Because, as somebody who does pick some pretty big fights, you may have noticed I got a bit of Wolverine in me. I'm the first guy in, I'm the last guy to get knocked out. I'm
Yeah.
back in 4 turns later, but Wolverine tends to get knocked on his ass a lot. These fights don't feel good. You don't feel like a hero. And all of this, all of this stuff that is getting away from really examining what it means to be a warrior as opposed to a hero, I think is in the way. I think because we were gonna branch this out into bad or lazy writing, and we'll do that next time.
Yeah.
But I do honestly think that the problem with the examination of the woman in refrigerator trope is they just, and this drives, I'm gonna go here, guys. I'm gonna go here. This drives me crazy about feminist analysis as somebody who still self-identifies as a feminist by the skin of my teeth. It's tough to hang on some days because of, how you only stay in something because you don't want it to go completely to shit.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. Like, somebody needs to be the guy going, Thanos is coming, right? That was
Yeah.
Bruce Banner, wasn't it? Hey, there we go. We're back on terra firma. But but they just go, oh, there's this example, and there's this example, and there's this example, and there's this example, and look at all the examples, and this means what? They never actually make a claim that can be tested. They just make observations. Now, this is the thing with the left in general. They're great at identifying the problem. But the real challenge, the place you're really going to take shit, the place people are going to disagree is, what's the core of the problem and what do we do about it? And I really do think when you drill down, especially in fiction, nothing in fiction just dangles there as a floating abstraction. It all connects to things. And I do think that a lot of these tropes that are supposed to be against women do come from the fact that the world sees men, especially men. Well, comic books are not kind to very intelligent men. They tend to be the evil villains or really, really flawed kind of anti-heroes. But these media for men treat men as so emotionally shallow and limited that they keep going for these cheap outs and these cheap cliches. And as somebody who wants, a song finally saw Thor Love and Thunder, and she had the exact reactions I thought she would to it. I was like, yay, I actually know her. But they had to do 2 hours of goofy all over the place bullshit to really show a very, very legitimately emotional Thor.
Okay. I was telling my mom about the movie last night, and
right. Oh boy.
Okay. I believe I've mentioned I come from a very religious background.
Yeah.
I was raised very, very Christian, and it has taken me years. I'm still dealing with the fallout of this.
Yeah.
And so Gore's entire plot, the betrayal by his god, I'm sitting there going, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
It's speaking to me.
He was a very sympathetic villain. As horrific as he was, you felt where he was coming from.
And especially for me, having been in a situation where my entire religious belief for years was suddenly pulled out from under me. Well, not even that. I had years of building up and realized, no, wait, you all suck.
Yeah.
Like I believe in God. I don't believe in you people.
That's a great way of putting it.
But the fact that the actor who was playing the god played it so hammy and so cheesy and so comedic, I was so mad. I'm like, I can actually get something from this storyline. This can actually do something to make me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And you're
Oh,
making
that's
a joke of
interesting.
it.
Because I thought it was supposed to, I thought that hamminess was supposed to make them seem, I took it from, because the thing, and I guess it's different religious. Wow, I started this sentence 16 times. Let me try to actually finish this. Fuck. Because my religious background sees the aspect of God and humanity as free will. I thought that the hamminess was because gods are things without problems. They can wipe people out with the snap of a finger. Of course, they're going to be shallow assholes. And it's interesting that because of a different experience, you took a completely different, equally valid view of it.
I don't mind the shallow asshole. For me, it was just there was something about the performance that made it funny. And just when Gore picked up the sword, I'm like, yeah, do it. But I didn't get the emotional release that I could have gotten from it and from the whole story arc.
That's
And
interesting
then,
because I thought that comes right at the end.
well, it obviously, I know what they were trying to do. I just didn't hit right for me.
Yeah, and that's
And
fair.
typically, I hate Goofy. I I don't like. I don't mind the occasional one-liners, but I hate. That's part of why. I mean, look, when The Mandalorian came out, and my best friend was convincing me to watch it, he said,
Right.
"Look, Taika Waititi plays a droid that gets killed twice," and I said, "Keep talking. This
Oh,
works
okay.
for me."
So you just don't like his style.
I don't.
Because I thought it
Um,
was interesting that one of the first gods he wiped out was Maori. Like it was his own background.
yeah,
Sorry, it
I
wasn't Maori, it was Polynesian.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't. That makes sense from the
Yeah.
look. I don't know much about Polynesian mythology.
Yeah.
Um, so it didn't even matter who it was. Now, admittedly, I also hated what they did with Zeus.
I agree with you on that one. I start to finish did not like Zeus. And so there was nothing in that sequence of the except for the We Fridge Loki reference. I'll take that. But um yeah, that was a
Yeah.
for you scene song. That was not a for me scene.
You know, yeah, I didn't even mind. Obviously, I didn't mind Chris Hemsworth being naked. I hated the goofiness. It's like, despite everything, I still love mythology. And as flawed as the gods are, I still want them to have a level of nobility, even if it's
Of
just a
majesty.
pretentious,
Majesty.
yes, majesty.
Yeah.
That's it. And
Yeah.
I didn't see that. And I think
And
that's also what it was in that first scene where I'm like, this god, he's a joke. So I don't get any relief from that because it doesn't matter because he was a joke.
and I do think that goes back to I was talking to somebody last night about this, that I think that blockbuster film companies really underestimate how much the audience can handle and how much the audience can understand. And I
Yeah.
think they are so, because guy I was talking to said I wish they just let things hang. I wish they'd let characters sit in things for a moment. And I said, but you know as well as I do, someone would go on the internet and go, my anxiety, it triggered my anxiety. And so they bathos the shit out of everyone. And for people who don't know what bathos is, it's basically that letting the air out of the balloon phenomenon that you see in Marvel movies all the time and otherwise emotional moments.
Yeah. It's the serious moment that's undercut by a joke.
Yeah.
And that I hated Thor Ragnarok. Just hands down hated it. It couldn't decide if it wanted to be Game of Thrones or if it wanted to be Guardians of the Galaxy. If they'd gone Game
Oh,
of
that's
Thrones, I might have
okay.
liked it.
Because I was
Here's
just all, oh, they're doing Backdoor Planet Hulk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but Love and Thunder was even more frustrating because the actual story that's there, not even just the stuff about killing gods and
Yeah.
all that, but the Thor and Jane story, if that had been played straight and if it hadn't been surrounded in all this goofy humor and silliness and, oh, what's my catchphrase? God, if it hadn't been for that, I would have liked that story. I like what they did. I loved that moment where he said, I choose love. I'm spending these minutes with her.
But let's face it, that's a 2-hour fridge.
Yeah.
She dies to advance him.
But at the same time, it's like, I can't believe they got Natalie Portman back for even one movie.
Well, I think there were a lot of compromises for her to get her back. They had to keep him happy. They had to keep her happy. And you see all the seams left over from that. But the fact that they did it, but there's a perfect example of sometimes fridges work because
And
it forced them to confront their own, both of their own stuntedness.
yeah.
And I mean,
And
part of what happens to Jane is because of her choices. So I'm sure some people will argue me on that it's a fridge. It's a partial fridge, but it definitely is designed to move him somehow.
yeah.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, I'm going to bring up two examples of movies that could be considered fridging, but that I have a very special love for. The first is Gladiator.
Okay.
Because God, I'm weird. It's not that it's one of my favorite movies, but I like the concept.
Okay.
And my mom has watched it so many times. But Gladiator, the whole story is he wants to go home. And it comes back to this idea I was talking about before of the warrior who has fought and now he just wants to go home and rest.
Right.
But because Commodus is a little jerk,
yeah,
he takes that away. And so Maximus can't rest until Commodus is gone and taken out. There's the symbolism of that, of his rest being taken away brutally. The other one, and this is really weird, is I love the John Wick movies. Now, I have a friend who has laughed at me and said, you are the only person who likes John Wick for anything other than the fight scenes, because I hate the fight scenes. I get bored. Like, first time through, and it's the same way with Marvel movies. First time through, I'm like, okay, this fight is interesting. You got mirrors, you got this, you got that. Second time, I'm like, can we just get to the lore bits? Because that's my big thing with John Wick, is I love the lore of the world.
They're so samey. Like, at least John Wick did a few interesting things with I've only seen the first one, but
yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. The action stuff is getting very by the numbers and the pacing is always the same.
Yeah.
With
and
notable exceptions.
I understand that there are people who they like the action scenes and they're like, oh, this is so cool, yada yada. But for me, it's the John Wick movies do not work without the death of his wife and the death of the dog. I can't even.
Yeah.
That movie plays and the Russians come into his house and you hear Daisy start squealing and I'm like, I'm in the other room now. I don't want to hear it. It's he had something good, he lost it, she found a way to give him happiness again, and then some idiot came in and said, I'm gonna take this away, and now he's like, you know what, I'm gonna fuck everyone over. Plus the whole crime underworld thing, like I said, the world building in that, I'm here for it. I didn't like the man who sits above the table. I thought that was it was too metaphysical.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. Third movie, but I've been waiting for the fourth one.
Okay.
And then I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Every time it's delayed, I'm like, why you do this to me?
It's funny because I felt the same way about The Matrix. I thought the first one did some interesting things, but as the subsequent ones came out, I felt that was more and more by fluke.
Okay, here's I did a 30-minute video on my opinions on the fourth Matrix movie and why part of it is I'm just going to recommend people go watch that video because I'm proud of how it came out.
Yeah. You can send me the link to it. I'll put it in the description box.
Yeah. So the thing about the Matrix movies is when I was younger, I was like, oh, this is really deep. This is interesting. And then I got older and I'm like, actually, it's not. It's
Yeah.
very generic.
Yeah.
And then the fourth movie came out and everyone was like, oh, well, this and that. And I'm like, no, actually, a lot of the stuff you're complaining about has been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like the power of true love has always been a thing in the Matrix movies, which is probably why I liked it without understanding when I was a kid.
Well, because that's an offshoot of the power of will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Trinity literally brings Neo back to life with a kiss in the first one.
Yeah.
You don't get more fairy tale than that.
No. No, I do think that we're okay. Let's bring this back to the whole refrigerator thing because that,
Yes.
it's sort of, and this is the thing about these topics, it does start when you really unpack it and you really talk about it instead of just playing example whack-a-mole. You do get into these deeper themes and it all does pull apart like an onion, which is why these conversations end up being so lengthy because one thing jumps to the other, jumps to the other, jumps to the other. And if you don't include all this context, your analysis of the thing is incredibly reductive.
Because nothing exists in a vacuum.
Especially not popular entertainment.
Yeah.